Okay, hello. This is an interesting time as the Fantastic Fest coverage is coming to an end. There should be an interview or three coming up on the channel. The Dexter coverage has not finished, so while I'm in this lull, I decided to take this time to field some requests by channel members and patrons. And this one's brand new. I guess the the order in which I receive them is when I react to them the soonest, which means the newest ones tend to go first. I realize how unfair that is, but I apologize. Just a weird pocket for me where I decided, hey, okay, now is a good time because apparently this video is only half an hour or so, and it's a good supporter of the channel. There was a note attached. CP, can you please do a live watch along on this video? This is one of my favorite quote unquote slop tuber. I don't think that's meant to be an insult. I think that's meant to be like, is that the same thing as a bread tuber now, right? Bread tube is now slop tube, as long as it's not AI. Based on real things, in parentheses, it says you may know her dep herd content. Oh, okay. That's real. I tried to avoid as much, although Johnny Depp is kind of an actor, so there's a lot of Depp herd content. I don't know which one I'd be familiar with, but anyway. And the next word is anyway. This video is brand new, and she's covering the new Ed Gein series. Oh, and goes through some things I've seen you talk about a while back. I'm curious to see just how much you agree with her and don't. Thanks for being you. Okay. So this is a slop tuber who covers what seems like real stuff. The Depp herd stuff is, that trial and everything surrounding that is not something I would be comfortable dropping a penny on, let alone 2 cents. But the Ed Gein stuff, I think I have an idea of where this could be going. It does trace back to, I was reluctant to get on board with Dexter Resurrection, the way they had real life killers in that like museum room. I'm someone that thinks you don't need to remind society about real life killers, especially if you're doing fictional killers. I would say do one or the other and not blend the two, because it further, I don't want to say romanticizes this, but I don't know, people who need to be nurtured and taken care of get the wrong signals from the celebrity that we give, involuntary or not, to these people that, we should know victims' names way more than we know real life terrible people. I'm not sure. This could be on a casting thing. It's 30 minutes. I can't imagine just, why are we doing an Ed Gein show? But I'm literally in the dark. I'm all in the dark here. I will pause it as it happens. So I think I have an idea of what angle we're approaching with, but I certainly could be wrong. So without further ado.
Hi. So for over a year now, I've been working on a very long video essay thing about the Ed Gein case. It started with a video that I made last year about desperate housewives, and then things just sort of like spiraled from there, and I've been in a hell of my own making ever since. At this point, I am kind of the...
This video is like brand new. This is a 2 days old. With love and respect, you guys know I'm an observational comedian. When you guys send me stuff to react to, it's never something like, hey, CP, Charles, CPO, can you react to this 50-year-old man discussing the military approach of World War II. It's always something, and it's not even, it's different people. You guys are a bunch of simps. It's, hey, Charles, can you react to this conventionally attractive person discussing things that you probably disagree with, and so we could help stir the pot? I'm not saying that that's the case here, but eh, eh, if I were to roast my own audience, you guys are very simpy at times. I'm jumping to conclusions, but yeah, I'm shocked. It's not some 50-year-old man.
The world's leading expert on Ed Gein. It's not because I actually know that much about him. It's more of just the fact that everyone else who claims to know things about him is provably wrong in most of the stuff they say, and often is just making shit up. So I am the world's leading expert now, just by default.
I'm not. I don't know why this. I'm really hoping it's in regards to this show because I'm not incredibly well versed on Ed Gein. I know that a lot of credit goes to Ed Gein, and it's more like inspiration. It's more like, oh, Jaws is inspired by real events because water exists, and it's like, yeah, well, yes, sort of, but Ed Gein gets a lot of credit that, I don't know, he's one of the first weirdos. But I'm not well versed on Ed Gein at all. So we're at a disadvantage to begin with.
I'm not thrilled about it. There's definitely cuter stuff that I could be an expert in,
Preach.
but that is the situation we found ourselves in, so it does just make me really annoyed now when I see people spreading misinformation about the Ed Gein case, especially since that misinformation has historically had a lot of real-world impact that's not great. The Ed Gein narrative, as it's popularly been told, is one that is soaked in a lot of misogyny, transphobia, and just the very American tendency to glorify and or try to give some sort of transcendental meaning to white male individualism.
So far, I agree. I perhaps miscalculated. I cynically so thought that this was going to be some sort of tea stirring event. So I agree with most everything she said so far. And again, I'm not incredibly well versed on Mr. Ted Gein. I know it's Ed. I think I was calling him Ted Gein. Ted Levine. Oh, conspiracy.
Obviously, I talk about that much more in my actual video, and if you'd like to watch sections of that now, I have uploaded the prologue to my main channel for members.
An hour and 39 minutes. God bless. That's incredible.
So if you go over there to the main channel, regular Medusone, not this one, not Medusone Deluxe Edition, but just Medusone. If you get a membership, you can watch the prologue, and then every time I finish a section, I'm going to be uploading it for members until I finish the final part, and then I will upload the whole thing for the public. But
Respect.
I do have a day job, so it's gonna be a minute. As I've been working on my own video, though, a few months into the writing and researching phase of my project, Ryan Murphy announced that he was going to be making an Ed Gein series of his own with his, monsters anthology series thing. I don't know, what you would consider it, if it's, like a season, season 3 of Monsters, or if it would be considered its own separate series. Whatever, I don't care. The monsters thing that he does, the true crime thing that he does on Netflix, Ed Gein is going to be the 3rd installment of that. And since so much of my video...
What was it? It was Dahmer most recently, right? Who is it before Dahmer? I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be a series on purpose.
Is about the ways that other people have narrativized Ed Gein throughout the years. With this series coming out at some point in the near future, I have spent the last year trying to outrun it. Clearly, I have failed because the release date has now been officially announced and I don't have my video done. That's what happens when you take your time and work on something really hard. Unlike some people who can just shit out whole seasons of TV in less than a year, even though they have like 20 other shows going. Because,
They have a significantly stronger budget, I would argue.
here's the problem. I don't want to address the Ryan Murphy show in my video. The script is essentially done, part 1 is almost completely edited, so having to find places to put stuff about the Ryan Murphy show into my script is just a huge pain in the ass. But not talking about it at this point would be a pretty glaring omission considering the nature of my essay. I was trying to be hopeful for a long time that maybe the show would just end up being, like, mid. I had no faith in it ever actually turning out to be good, but the worse it was, the weirder it would be for me to not talk about it in my video to some significant degree. I was hoping that if it was just, like, kind of bad, that I could just, like, find a few spots in my script to add.
I have not watched it yet. I was under the impression that I thought it was coming around for like Halloween time, October. Granted, I'm recording this in September, but I have not seen. I've been sort of busy with watching things, so if it's out, I haven't watched it yet. So I'm unfamiliar. Yet again, appreciative to have me react to something that I'm in the dark.
Some little commentary here or there and just leave it at that. The more promo the show does in the lead up to its release, though, the more it's becoming clear that it's gonna be worse than mid. What I've decided to do then is just make a separate, far lower effort series where I'm just reacting to the show after it comes out that I'll just put on my second channel, which is where you are right now, and then I'll just let that exist as my official commentary on the show. Because it hasn't even premiered yet, and I'm already furious. So, real quick, let's just go through some of the promotional material so that I can explain some of the issues I'm already having. First, this is being advertised the way that everything about Ed Gein is advertised, which is like, before there was Norman Bates, there was Ed Gein, and like, yeah, technically, in like the chronology of things existing, the human being Ed Gein did exist before the fictional character Norman Bates, but that is always said with this implication that Norman Bates is based on Ed Gein, which he isn't.
No.
I know that's gonna.
All right, I guess here's the fork in the road. She used the word based. I'm going to be a gatekeeper movie snob here. There's actually a difference between inspired by and based on. Inspired by would be the term that I would say that I'm familiar with when it comes to Ed Gein. Again, which isn't, I'm not strong enough to like, you know, build a brick house over this statement here. But inspired by means they're taking liberties. Based on, I mean, they're even taking liberties when they do something that's based on a true story. Inspired by, again, like what I said earlier about Jaws, inspired by it's a marketing trick to get people to think, oh, this really happened. Like I said, oh, Jaws is inspired by a real event. And the only inspiration is water. And, they leave it vague like that because we're weird about things that really happen. There is a difference, believe it or not. There's a difference between inspired by true events and based on true events. So a little, technically.
Be like hard for a lot of people to hear because that's kind of like the main thing about Ed Gein that people know is that Psycho is based on him and Norman Bates specifically is based on him, and that's
Inspired by.
just not true. You don't have to take my word for it even. You can just look at what the man who wrote Psycho himself said. Robert Bloch said, and I quote, "I did not use Ed Gein as a basis for Norman Bates at all." So, there you go. It is true that Psycho was inspired by Ed's story, but just in a way less direct way than people seem to think. All that happened was that Robert Bloch found out that in a small Wisconsin town where everyone knew everyone, there was a guy that got away with some pretty horrendous crimes for a couple years. He thought that was interesting and decided to write a book about a guy getting away with murder for a while before getting caught. That is the actual connection between Ed Gein and Psycho.
Yeah, it's inspired by, and I would assume back then, was it 70 years ago now? Not until Son of Sam did they get really technical and uptight about, well, Psycho's inspired by, but stuff that's like based on true events, and if someone suffered, the people that committed those acts weren't allowed to financially benefit from those. So Psycho is even before Son of Sam. So there's a lot of video left here, but I think I see where we're going.
The basic concept of a serial killer existing and killing people in a serial fashion. Now, considering Psycho the movie came out years before Ed even went to trial, it was massively popular, and it was already being advertised as a story that was based on the true story of Ed Gein, for marketing purposes.
Right.
By the time the trial actually happened, everyone already had it in their head that Ed Gein was the real-life Psycho, and so the popular narrative of Ed Gein is actually based on Norman Bates way more than Norman Bates was based on Ed Gein.
I would even go so far as to say that Ed Gein is more popular like after something like Silence of the Lambs than after Psycho. I remember not having... I would argue that fans of Psycho didn't really know Ed Gein by name until, years, decades later. The internet makes things a lot easier for people who want to, spaz out and look into things. That wasn't the case back during Psycho. I would argue most people didn't know Ed Gein by name back then. But since then you've had things like Ted Bundy and Son of Sam, these quote unquote celebrity killers that, you look into things, and I would say youth knows more about Ed Gein now than youth did during the Psycho run.
Obviously, I talk about that much more in my actual video, but it's important to bring up here just because of the social function that the Ed Gein story has always served. See, just a few years before Ed was arrested, America had
I don't know if I should bring attention to this. I need better glasses. I legitimately thought that she was doing something creative with her hair. You open a magazine and their hair is, they're not wearing a shirt, but their hair is strategically over their chest. I thought that there wasn't a shirt here, and it only took me till right now to realize, oh, it's a nude colored shirt, and I'm gonna have to change my glasses. You're gonna read into that one way or another, and both are going to be negative, but the real joke here is that I'm blind.
Just found out that trans people existed. Christine Jorgensen got outed as a trans woman in the early 1930s. 1950s, and given the influence
Newspaper
Freudian
articles.
psychology had gained in the aftermath of World War II, there was a lot of paranoia in the air about men being feminized by the culture, but also specifically their mothers. Men went off to war for a while, children were being raised by their mothers primarily, and also women had been gaining increased rights in America, which was really scary to a lot of people. So there were just a lot of feelings around that. That is really what the story of Psycho is built around, just some bullshit Freudian psychology. And that's the same thing that the police were using to kind of build this profile of Ed Gein as a criminal, even though they didn't actually have a whole lot of data to do that. So there are similarities between the ways that the police and the media were portraying Ed Gein prior to the release of Psycho and the actual characterization of Norman Bates, but to be clear, Robert Bloch wasn't reading those news reports. He didn't know anything about the case. The similarities between Norman and the media depiction of Ed isn't a coincidence. It's just that they were both based on the same profile that was invented by Freudian psychology. The misogynistic and transphobic fears that Psycho to some degree expresses, though, gets legitimized to people as a justified fear when you tell them that Norman Bates was based on a real person, which he wasn't. I can already tell from a lot of this promo that Ryan Murphy is really leaning into the Norman Bates Buffalo Bill inspired idea of Ed that is not only inaccurate to what primary sources from the case actually show, but that actively promotes the idea of gender non-conforming people being psychos that has already killed way more people than Ed Gein ever could. Because of the lack of investigation actually done into his crimes, it's impossible to say what Ed's motives really were, but it really doesn't seem like his gender identity was ever a factor. There are definitely a few other aspects of his life that I think were bigger contributing factors that I would really love to see someone like Ryan Murphy exploring, but it doesn't seem like those factors are getting taken that seriously in this new show, because, well,
Uh, I, hmm, I'm of multiple perspectives here. For the sake of doing a multi-episode series, you're not going to make a television show that is frame by frame, the things that happened. You take liberties, especially with something that's inspired by real events and not based on true events. You're kind of fabricating for the sake of being entertaining. I think too often people are watching things that are based on real life or inspired by real events and treating these movies that are fiction like nonfiction. And I don't know if there's some sort of deprogramming that needs to be made, or if these people who are making these pieces of art really need to go harder and let people inform people that, yeah, this is based on it. We're taking liberties here. It used to be at the end of the credits, any familiarity is completely coincidental. Maybe they need to throw that in the beginning. But you know that Hollywood and studios and marketing, if they can get buzz off people thinking this stuff really happened, they'll exploit that. And at the same time, if you're treating some of this stuff like it's, every frame, every word uttered is what happened, that just doesn't work for narrative's sake. If this guy's story was so entertaining and riveting, it would have happened multiple times before. Yet another reason why, when they do horror movies and they inspire some of the things from him, they're not taking his entire story. They're taking a piece like, oh, this guy used to have flesh for lampshades. Let's somehow incorporate that element into other things. Usually it's because the complete story isn't that, captivating. Um, you're like retroactively taking liberties to make a more entertaining series. From what I remember of the Dahmer one, they took liberties too, where like things were very convenient for the sake of like time and situations flowing easier. Um, if you're not treating these things like nonfiction, I would hope people would understand that this isn't the way it happened as it happened. And I don't like. I think there's a stronger question to be asked. Why do we want things to be exactly the way they are? It's interesting to be educated and informed on these things because we'd like to avoid these things. At least I think. Um, but uh, th- th- I think I'm starting to understand why you wanted me to watch this. Um, I think there are plenty of questions, and I don't have any of the answers. I just have more questions about what is the right thing to do. How do we properly respect the victim? Because I will say I don't think we do a good enough job on that. And should we be making these people larger than life? And I guess with that said, making the story more engaging and more entertaining probably doesn't help that point. Yeah, my mind's a pretzel.
Well, it's like let's just talk about Charlie Hunnam's casting for a second. I was trying to be really hopeful about this thing not being as bad as I knew it could be, so when it was announced that Charlie was playing Ed Gein, I was intent on not seeing that as a doomed venture from the start. I haven't seen that much of Charlie's filmography, but from what I have seen, I do think that he is a really talented actor, and I think that he does have more range than people really give him credit for, so as far as like acting abilities go, I don't think that this role is necessarily out of his wheelhouse, but obviously, like, the big problem here is that he is just kind of like physically very different from Ed Gein. Again, thinking on the bright side, I was like, well, I don't know how long he had to like prepare between when he was cast and when the actual filming started, so
But like, how much footage, how much documentation of Ed Gein is there where you could pull up a character study and figure out characteristics to mimic? There's if I recall correctly, that Charlie Hunnam's like makeup, he's got like this prosthetic over his eye. Um, yeah, that's why these actors take these roles to you know become something they're not. Uh, I will not throw shade at Charlie Hunnam. Like, there's a couple of things that I quite enjoyed. Sons of Anarchy is at the top, and that was a television series, so some experience in the format.
maybe he could like lose a whole bunch of weight and then they could just use makeup and lighting and different wardrobe and camera angle decisions to make him look a little bit more like haggard and thin the way that Ed Gein was, but then I saw the promotional photos. Maybe the promo material is intentionally misleading. I mean, he's holding a chainsaw here, which Ed Gein
October 3rd.
definitely didn't use, but they're making a reference to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a movie that actually is partly based on Ed Gein, so that could just be like a cheeky nod to the movie, and maybe it won't necessarily reflect the way that they tell the story in the show. Looking deeper into it, though, there have been some shots released from the show itself, including one of Ed looking at a collection of chainsaws in a store window, so I'm getting the impression that the chainsaws will be a part of the show, which
That's a freeze frame. Again, um, if you're going to think anything of marketing and Hollywood, is they cynically exploit things. I think they're inverting your knowledge of what Ed Gein has inspired. Because if you don't bring up Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, countless others, people don't give a shit. And I guess the argument can be made there. Well, if you need to lean on all of this fiction shit to have your audience drawn to someone, is their story really worth telling? Brilliant point. I think it's just a sticky road to not do things perfectly to the nonfiction story, but at the same time go too hard at being a bit fictitious and extravagant. Although it's just a frame. You're talking about it. It could be something where he's going shopping for something, and if you know, it's an Easter egg. I think it's difficult to discuss these things when they're just marketing material. I mean, how many movies did they have trailers where there's stuff that's in the trailer that just doesn't end up in the movie? It's very hard to judge something based on their marketing materials without knowing what purpose it serves for the story itself. It could just be an Easter egg, fan service for people that know. Difficult.
Doesn't make any sense, but okay. But the main problem that I'm having with these images already is just that I find it really hard to believe that Charlie Hunnam was able to achieve a significantly different physique between whenever these promo photos were taken and whenever they actually filmed the show. And that is a pretty big deal right off the bat. I know in the Dahmer series there was a lot of controversy about Evan Peters' casting because Evan Peters is so fucking hot. Personally, though, I didn't think his casting was that inappropriate. Jeffrey Dahmer was a decently attractive guy. Maybe not as attractive as Evan Peters, but who is? In a big Hollywood production, in order to even, communicate the fact that someone was, decently good looking, you kinda do have to get, a super hot person, because, real life hot doesn't translate on film that well. Not
I think when you're making something, the old Hollywood adage still applies that you want to show the most attractive among us, and it's something of a story when someone who's conventionally attractive manages to play these ugly roles. Yeah, there are multiple ways people can be frustrated at some of the casting, but I would argue, there's no right answer, because if you cast an unattractive person, then it's something like a slap in the face to the actor that's playing that person. So I think depending on what you want to be frustrated and bothered by, there's a lot to chew on all sides of the perspective, on all perspectives and sides. I'll just let it go.
When every Hollywood production is filled with the most attractive people you've ever seen. So that kind of made sense to me. If you're translating the real life story of Jeffrey Dahmer to a Netflix show, yeah, you're probably going to get someone hotter than Jeffrey Dahmer just to communicate that aspect of his cultural image.
I don't think it's as deep as that. I just think Hollywood, they want to put someone on the screen that the audience wants to fuck. I think it's that simple. I don't think it's, let's make this character somewhat attractive. I think it's, let's make our audience want to watch because pretty. I really genuinely think it's a lot closer to that than anything, because in the end, these people are ugly. They did horrible things. They shouldn't be considered attractive, like at all, like at all, at all.
Also, Jeffrey Dahmer lived like a relatively normal life aside from, like the serial killing part. So there's no reason for him to not look like a normal, good looking ish dude. Ed Gein, on the other hand, was not living a normal life at all, and that should be kind of evident in how he's portrayed physically. Ed Gein lived on a farmhouse miles outside town in a home with no electricity and no running water. A few years prior to his arrest,
Wait, you need electricity and water to be hot? I I think I'm offended. I haven't used electricity. Oh, never mind. I haven't used water in at least an hour or so. I'm still holding it together. I don't think I appreciate the implication here.
the pump in front of his house also broke, so the only way that he even had access to clean drinking water was through the goodwill of his neighbors, the same people that could give him access to refrigerated food. Some of those neighbors would invite him inside to eat dinner after he performed odd jobs for them, but
I don't see how any of this contributes to someone's attractiveness.
some of them also wouldn't, and at least one woman did talk about finding Ed so creepy that whenever she saw him coming toward her house to get water, she would just lock her doors and hide. So, most likely, Ed was low-key starving a lot of the time. If you want to explore his crimes and his psychology in depth, the abject poverty he was living in and how that might have been affecting his mental state should probably be at the core of your emphasis. But this simply just does not look like a malnourished man to me, nor does it look like a man without access to clean drinking water.
So to be fair to cynical Hollywood, I don't think that's on their target here. They want to tell you the story about this guy. It could be it's a multi-episode series where they could discuss being malnourished, but I don't think that's the principle of this story. There's a point where you have to figure out, all right, this is still fiction after all. How much do we want to have of the nonfiction story in here, and how does it serve our purpose with the narrative? This happens quite a bit where people expect too much nonfiction in their fiction, and I think it's a tightrope. It should serve the purpose of the story. There's contrivance in fiction, and omitting or fudging some real life aspects to have the story be more, forgive the term, digestible. They'll make that decision every time. Like I said, if you're watching a true to life story, it maybe won't be entertaining, and these people are in the business of entertainment first, is what I would say.
Now, I do appreciate the fact that in the trailers I've seen, it looks like the filmmakers have actually paid attention to the no electricity part. That is something that I don't think I've ever seen any other dramatization of Ed Gein depict, so good on them for that, I guess.
Yeah, if you unless your implication is Ed Gein did the horrible things that he did because he didn't have electricity, that would make it important to the story. I don't think anyone who's told that story is trying to imply that the fact that Ed Gein did not have electricity is the reason he did the horrible things he did. I just think it's another cog in the wheel that is unique and something worth talking about. I don't know if it's a factor towards the ultimate whatever you're trying to tell us about what it is he is. I don't think a lack of electricity is is what they're trying to say. But like by that logic, you could just do a movie about the Amish and just how scared we should be of them.
Whenever the sun went down, Ed was living in literal darkness, so I think that that's an important thing to represent. I'll give them a point for that one.
Well, electricity wasn't. We've only had electricity popularly for, you know, I mean, shit. There's again. I'll go back to the Amish. Um, you know, century and a half of having electricity. Some people who don't have money don't have it. Shit. There's still people who don't have the internet right now. 70 years ago, it might be a bit more common for people to not have electricity, especially if they live on farms and stuff. I think we're getting a little hung up on the electricity factor.
There's a lot of other shit that I could say about this trailer that I do not appreciate, like why the fuck is Bernice Warden wearing fishnets? But I'll save all of that for when I watch the actual show. The other main thing I want.
Getting hung up on very, very minute details. So when it comes to fiction, it is not a true to life. You're not mimicking every single characteristic. Visual storytelling, you're using certain colors, certain set design, certain wardrobe to influence the audience's emotions on something. Lighting. When you're telling a story, when you're doing fiction, in the end, it's still fiction. You're going to take liberties for the sake of it still being art. So you want to influence opinions without being a documentary, without being nonfiction. I think it's interesting to be held up on that. It could serve a visual storytelling purpose. And again, it's a trailer. It's hard to get frustrated one way or another on something that we don't really have access to just yet. But if you're going into these things expecting nonfiction, true to life, every piece matches what really happened, it's not going to be an enjoyable visual story. If it's true to life, it probably. I mean, if you can balance the line where it's true to life and visually engaging and evokes emotions, then that's quite incredible. But I think they're thinking of being an engaging story first and foremost, above all else.
Wanted to talk about right now, though, is a shot of Addison Rae in the trailer. I am a fan of Addison Rae. I know that that's not a super popular thing to say on the internet, but I really like her music. I can't say I follow her that closely outside of that, so I had no idea she was even in this show, and I definitely didn't know who she was playing, even after I watched the trailer, because quite simply, this is not something that Ed Gein ever did. I was very confused.
Sex appeal, horror, true crime, they're hand in hand. Horror, you're gonna get sex appeal. They're gonna shoehorn that into everything. Sucks that it's sad but true. There are tropes about the horror genre that I would say are fair. Again, they're playing to an audience more than they're playing to the story, the true story of this person or these people. Yeah, sucks. If that's not what really happened, yeah, I get it. Just interesting, the apparel or lack thereof used for a trailer shot. But yeah, again, think cynically first.
When I saw this initially, but I was just kind of hopeful that maybe this is like a fantasy sequence.
Mm,
Ed did read a lot of like true crime pulp magazines that would feature a lot of conventionally attractive young women in vulnerable situations on the cover. So I thought that maybe this was just like his idea of what it would be like to do that to somebody, and this isn't a real character at all. It's just
it's hard to go on conclusions based on a trailer and something that you don't really have to digest.
like, a figment of his imagination. But then I went to the Wikipedia page. I literally just wanted to see how many episodes of the show there were, but I scrolled past the cast section and found out who Addison Rae is playing. So, Addison Rae,
All
a
right,
20
hang on. I need to.
But we're all in the dark here. All in the dark here. We're all in the dark here.
Okey-dokey.
I literally just wanted to see how many episodes of the show there were, but I scrolled past the cast section and found out who Addison Rae is playing. So, Addison Rae, a 24-year-old woman who is being shown here in a matching bra and underwear set, is playing the missing 15-year-old child, Evelyn Hartley. Evelyn went missing from La Crosse, Wisconsin in 1953. She has always been a suspected victim of Ed Gein's, but never a confirmed one. If you want my professional opinion, as the leading expert in the case, I would put the likelihood of Ed being responsible for her disappearance at like 30 to 40%. There's reason to think that he's responsible, there's reason to think he's not, but if I'm being honest, most of the reason to think that he's not doesn't hold up that well upon further scrutiny.
Yeah. So, is this based on the series, or is this based like? Uh, I thought I knew what the suggestion for this video was, and I guess I'm wrong. It seems like there's qualms with the fact that this television series is taking liberties and kind of, you know, creating and connecting their own dots. I'm just going to be repetitive at this moment. Where, yeah, they're going to be doing that. It's not going to be a nonfiction.
But since the investigators in the case didn't apply any additional scrutiny, then we're just never gonna know. The thing that really needs to be emphasized about the Gein case is the fact that it was never properly investigated for anything, especially anything that took place outside of Waushara County, like the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley. See, there was a problem at
Yeah, so by that logic, you can't really tell this story because they don't have any concrete evidence that tells the story, so that they're going to have to, you know, bend and come to their own conclusions. You just shouldn't tell this story. I think that's the solution here. We shouldn't be talking about this. This shouldn't be happening. But they are, and they're going for a narrative.
the time with this Wisconsin law that had gotten passed just a few years prior to Ed's arrest, which required each individual county of Wisconsin to pay half the cost of any investigation that that county sent to the state crime lab in Madison. Because of the amount of shit that got taken out of Ed's house and sent to the crime lab, the bill for the investigation was rising to an astronomical degree, which effectively cut off any interest other counties had in the case. If La Crosse had pursued Ed as a suspect in the Evelyn Hartley disappearance, La Crosse would have had to pay at least a portion of that bill from the crime lab. Nobody wanted to do that. Even Washera County, the county Ed was arrested in, dropped their own claim to the case because they couldn't afford the bill either. The investigation was put on pause for months until the state eventually gave the crime lab some additional money to wrap the investigation up, but by that point, there was no formal institution for them to report their findings to. A month after Ed's arrest, a psychiatric...
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate and ask what does this piece of content, how is it relevant to me? I keep thinking I know why this was suggested, and then I'm wrong. I'm not someone who keeps a strong enough track of inspiration and true stories. So it's like I don't have investment in what really happened. I actually, if anything, I kind of wish we wouldn't talk about these cases so often, so vigorously, with so much interest. But for the sake of fiction and storytelling, I don't know. I'm of the mindset that, yeah, this stuff didn't really happen this way. You have to bend things for the sake of telling a good story. But I guess I understand not everyone is like that. And if you're grading these things based on how realistic they are, I don't know how I feel about that. And furthermore, I don't know what about this video is relevant to my opinion.
Evaluation deemed that he wasn't fit to stand trial, so he essentially just got put into a guardianship and then indefinitely hospitalized. Now, eventually there was a trial over 10 years later, but even then, most of the evidence found in his house couldn't actually be presented to the court because police never actually got a warrant to be in his house in the first place. So even if every county Ed was suspected of committing a crime in actually tried to investigate and charge him with those crimes, they would have been shit out of luck by the time they brought the results of that investigation to a judge, since everything the crime lab was evaluating was only acquired through an illegal search and seizure. For that reason, I think it's fine and even good to acknowledge the fact that Ed might have killed Evelyn Hartley along with several other people, because I think it's really important for people to understand how incomplete the investigation into his crimes was and how many other things he might have done that we will never have confirmed. The whole thing about him only murdering women who looked like his mother was ultimately just a convenient excuse to not make Ed a suspect in anybody else's disappearance, because there's definitely evidence of Ed's house containing traces of people that don't meet that description. Still, an acknowledgement of the fact that Ed might have done something is not the same as deciding that he did and then depicting it in your true crime show. Maybe this isn't supposed to be portrayed as literal in the series. We'll have to watch to find out.
I would hope
Perhaps
not.
this is just presented as like a hypothetical, but even still,
I would hope so.
what the fuck? This
Yeah.
is a 15-year-old child that, for no reason, Ryan Murphy decided to depict in a matching bra and panty set being held captive in a serial killer's house when we have no reason to believe anything like that ever happened.
Yeah, considering the actor is of age, I would much. Again, I don't know if we need to discuss or cover any of this at all. But if you feel the need to, I would be much more comfortable with a 20-something playing a 15-year-old rather than maintaining that scene and having a 15-year-old play a 15-year-old and put them in that same situation. I think for the sake of, again, fitting that narrative, bending in the legal direction is preferred. There are certainly other ways that you could approach this, and they can make other decisions that would be equally, if not more, troubling.
Even if Ed killed that girl, there's no evidence of him ever bringing any live victims into his house. Ever.
Yeah, and again, if what is it, 10 episodes, 8 episodes, 6? It's more than a movie. You're going to be running and jumping to your own conclusions again for the sake of a narrative, for the sake it's not all going to be verbatim as to what happened. It's caution on the side of entertaining rather than actually happened. It's contrivance. It's for the sake of fiction than nonfiction.
2 women we know he killed, he shot in the back of the head before taking them home. And with the grave robbery he admitted to, the way he described that to police indicates that he rarely took whole bodies home with him at all. A lot of the dismemberment that Ed did, he did at the cemetery. And for his second victim, there is some reason to believe he might have even decapitated her at the crime scene before bringing her back to his house.
Yeah, so for the sake of storytelling, you want to tell a story that is a bit more fulfilling rather than, oh, this dude just cut off heads. Like, as far as storytelling and what is the metaphor there? Like, what are the emotions I'm supposed to feel based on these actions by this character? If it's just someone who isn't mentally there, who's doing things that like we couldn't possibly comprehend, there is no understanding that. I think trying to make it something that you could wrap your head around, like, for the sake of having us understand just how unlike the rest of us these people are, I think you need to pull back and make it make sense. And make sense. I say that so loosely. I don't know. It should feel like there's some sort of narrative purpose for that. Like, if it's just dude beheading bodies and going back home, why are you telling that story? Like, it's just someone who's very disturbed. What is the intro conflict resolution of someone who just takes heads? Not much conflict there. I mean, there's conflict there very clearly, but what's the resolution other than go to jail? Go to jail, never see the light of day again. Is that redeeming, telling that story? Like, did we need to hear that story? Again, like, we're all at a disadvantage here without knowing where that story goes and what direction. But if they're going to tell that story, they're going to drape some sort of narrative around that. I think getting hung up on the fact that this isn't what really happened, this didn't really happen, this person didn't really exist. Yeah, they're taking liberties. And if you're watching these series, these movies, these fiction movies, inspired by real life events, if you're expecting those things to be exactly the way things played out, I have really unfortunate news for you. Like, really unfortunate news for you.
So this whole idea that he had a living 15-year-old in his home strapped to a chair is based on nothing other than the imagination of some weird-ass writer/producer. And again, this is a real missing child that Ryan Murphy is choosing to sexualize and then torture for entertainment.
Yeah, I agree with that. My solution would be to not do this at all. But I think someone would do it. Again, unfortunately so, horror sexualization happens a lot. And I think for the sake of storytelling, you can probably have artists figure out a way to tell you why it works. But Yeah, I don't entirely disagree.
Unlike with the first two Monsters series, he's probably going to evade getting pushback from the actual victims' families, since this all happened long ago enough that most of those family members are dead themselves. But that doesn't mean that a once living child's memory should just be fair game for some hack TV producer's torture porn. Like, this is just a weird thing to do. Now,
Well, I keep going back and forth on where I defend and what. We don't know what that girl's purpose is just yet. We don't know what purpose she serves in that show. For the sake of storytelling, God damn it. If you show someone who we're supposed to perceive as 15 and have them be sexualized, I agree. We shouldn't see it. But if you can get us to understand that the person who did these horrible things to this young girl sexualized her, if you can get us to empathize and feel disgust for the antagonist, the real question is, how much do you need to show to get us to understand just everything you need us to? And that is a fine line. Until I've seen it, I can't wrap my head around. Listen, I would be the first to say, why are we even doing this series to begin with? But that's me.
I tweeted about this the night I found out that Evelyn Hartley is the person Addison Rae is.
24-year-old pop icon Addison Rae played. I do not know why he chose to portray that child in her underwear in an imagined torture scene. I also do not know. What I do know is that I'm going to rip this show apart when it premieres. Well, that's knowing what you want to say. That I have an issue with that. Knowing that you're going to hate something and rip it apart. It could have narrative purpose. Could. I'm not saying it will, but to know how you're going to feel about something without experiencing it is, I don't think that's being fair. And I'm all over the place. Thanks for the suggestion, guys.
Is playing, and while most of the responses I got were the reasonable "what the fuck is Ryan Murphy doing" takes, there were two other ways that people decided to interact with the news that this is something Ryan Murphy is doing. One was just to be kind of dismissive by being like, ugh, fork found in kitchen. What did you expect? It's Ryan Murphy.
What?
And like, so? Yeah, Ryan Murphy is a fucking weirdo, and most of us already know that, but
again, I have to admit, I am unfamiliar with the weirdness. So I could be blissfully ignorant of this.
I don't think that that's really a good excuse to just ignore the weird things he's doing, especially when those weird things increasingly involve appropriating real people's stories. Like, I don't know who needs to hear this, possibly the whole fucking country, but
Maybe me.
the proper way to respond to bad people doing bad things is not to just ignore those bad things when it isn't shocking to you. This is like some cancel culture brained bullshit, and by that I mean there is a sizable amount of people on the internet whose main goal when engaging in political and social discourse is just to tear down someone that already has a fairly decent reputation, while not really concerning themselves with people that we already know suck doing worse things to greater effect. And there is an effect here, whether or not you want to admit it, because alongside the fork found in kitchen response that I received, there was also this idea of like, well, if you expect a Ryan Murphy show to be accurate, that's your own problem. No one takes those shows seriously. Even though, yes, they do. Clearly, a lot of people think that Ryan is accurately portraying the events in his shows, because the other response that I received pushing back on my tweet was absolutely predicated on people's assumption that whatever it is that Ryan is depicting must more or less be what happened. Shit like, casting adults to play teenagers is normal, and if this is how it went down, I fail to see what the problem is. Well, the problem is that that's not how anything went down. That's something that Ryan Murphy made up. People haven't even watched the fucking show yet, and they're already deciding just based on a screenshot that whatever it is that's being depicted here probably more or less happened.
But can't you say the exact opposite? It's a frame of film that you don't have the context for either. I th- I think I understand why you had me watch this. Coming to conclusions based on marketing materials for a fictional film inspired by, merely inferred, implied, really happened. That's equally as head scratching. Um, I, I think letting the scene itself speak for itself is best to criticize. Coming to one conclusion or another based on marketing materials that may or may not even be in the finished product. It lacks context. Like it's weird. Like I'm of multiple minds, and I think I'm blissfully ignorant of this person's history, but people who think that these things really happened, you're watching these pieces of fiction for the wrong reasons. And on the other side, if you're having issue with these fiction stories not being real enough, I think there's this sweet spot in the middle where people aren't factoring in that storytelling is contrived. Like it does not claim to be nonfiction. It does not claim to be as the way things happened 100% of the time. You have to bend things for the sake of narrative, for storytelling, for artistic influence. That certainly could be questionable and foggy, but I think both sides of the "this really happened" thing are failing to realize that this is entertainment, and thousands of questions as to why is this entertainment. Touche, brilliant point. But if you're taking this too realistically, one way or another, I think you're missing the point that this is meant to be a story. And if this situation is created, I would tend to, without knowing, I would tend to lean on the fact that maybe the filmmakers, the writers, the creators need us to understand and empathize or sympathize with a character to get us to understand, like, this is evil. What this person is doing, they're taking an innocent young child and sexualizing them and putting them through just absolute torture. If it's something as devoid of, I don't know, anything, or just someone cutting someone's head off and then going about their day, I don't know if you can wrap your head around that. I don't know, narratively speaking, how do you make that, like, how do you get us to feel something or have some sort of understanding? Usually when it comes to children and innocence, there's a way to, I don't know, see someone you know or love and kind of feel awful about it. I think that's why when it comes to killing, it's there's this like separation between killing and sexual assault, because sexual assault is trauma for the victim, whereas murder, killing, is trauma for loved ones of the victim. And there's a lot to go over here. I'm not comfortable with that. Like the fact that there's this feature, this work isn't exactly out there just yet. It's hard to take a stance one way or another, but I think the fact that there are stances, people are coming to conclusions without the entire product. That's frustrating.
Because most people do assume that whatever is being shown in a TV show boasting itself as a dramatization of real events is probably mostly accurate.
I'm going to look up the word dramatization now because I want to make sure. A play or movie adapted from a novel or depicting a particular event. A dramatization of a true story. So, adapted is not a one-to-one. The reform of copyright law to prevent dramatization of novels without the author's sanction. I think expecting these things to be 100% accurate is unfair. And I realize that there are people that do expect these things to be 100% accurate. Nope. That's not the, nope. And if you're watching these fictional things and thinking it really happened, equally, nope.
And that should be a fair assumption to make. Whether or not Ryan Murphy is a creep, he is a very powerful and successful TV producer who has access to resources that other people don't have. There is a reasonable expectation that he's going to use those resources to make an accurate representation of the things he's saying
But who's coming to that conclusion?
he's portraying. But that's clearly not what he's using his resources for, and he just keeps getting away with it. This monster show gets billions of views every season, and we should not all be so comfortable with the fact that that is going to give Ryan Murphy and his team of writers an absolutely absurd level of influence over how countless people view the cases he's presenting. And this series of monsters is probably going to have an even worse impact on how people view the case because, unlike with the Jeffrey Dahmer series and the Menendez series, there are hardly any living people that actually were around to witness what happened to publicly push back on whatever the fuck Ryan says happened. He can take whatever liberties with this season that he wants, and it probably just won't even matter. But whatever. Despite everything I've just said, I'm still gonna try to go into this show with an open mind. I am hopeful that this will somehow exceed my expectations, because I honestly just don't want to talk about it at all, and the worse it is, the more I'm gonna feel compelled to talk about it, so hopefully this isn't as bad as I think it's definitely gonna be. But anyway, I guess I'll just see y'all in October.
It doesn't sound like she's going into this with an open mind. I'm unfamiliar if he's the showrunner and the creator of the Monster series. I don't know, the fact that those Netflix series have cultural impact. I don't know if he's 100% to be credited with all that. But I think anyone who thinks this stuff like is accurate, like I would really stress that look into just how much you're the most realistic movie you could think of. Look into how much is fabricated, and then if it's something as simple as this person never wore red socks, how important is that to you? These films, these shows, they are entertainment after all. They are art. And art is not nonfiction. There are often times where things are done with some sort of narrative purpose. I'm of the mindset that maybe we can adapt from these stories without letting us know who the actual people are and kind of take liberties as you're going to anyway. This way, no one can claim that it's real, and no one can idolize people that really shouldn't be idolized. but I don't have the solution here. I appreciate the suggestion. You guys are simps, man. I'm telling you, find me a 45-year-old man who's talking about, I don't know, how to fix up a broken down pickup truck and ask me why my opinion matters for that. Because y'all with your conventionally attractive young girl in their 20s, simps. You're all simps. But I understand. I think. Let me know why. If you don't send me a DM, I'm curious as to why my opinion matters here. Because there are things that I think I understand, and it always seems like when you suggest something like this, it is because I have a rather unpopular opinion in the horror community. I don't like celebrating real terrible people and putting them alongside fictional characters. I think, the fact that I have a Friday the 13th poster, that's fiction. It would be weird if Jason Voorhees was a real person. I'd feel really odd about having a Jason Voorhees mug if that was a real person. Not to mention the fact that he's been dead a bunch of times. That's beyond. Well, anyway, so there's some soul searching to be done, and I don't have the answers. What do you think? Does the truth of the subject matter in a story like this? If it's not 100% real, does it bother you? If it's 100% real and boring, is that still okay to you? If it's 100% real, but the character does not look like the hideous chud that you would expect the person to look like, does that take you out of it? I guess it's a sliding scale, right? Like how much are you willing to bend for the sake of having these real stories dramatized? Easy for you to say. Click like, subscribe. I don't have answers. What are yours?